Yeah, as Jesse said, I'm new. I moved to Salina about a year ago, and soon after that started attending church here with the intent of visiting a variety of churches. Well, he does my favorite kind of preaching where you take a book and you just work your way through it. And I kept, at the end of the sermon, well, I got to see what he says next week. I just kept coming back. Anyway, my name is Lissy Currie. I grew up on a small farm outside of Salem, Oregon, and my dad worked in town. He was a truck driver and co-owner of a small trucking company that moved people from house to house. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. We were just a pretty common middle-class, blue-collar family of the 1950s. I was the oldest. I had one sister and then two brothers. My parents were both first-generation Americans. My mother's parents had come from Denmark, and my Danish grandmother lived in the home with us as I was growing up. And my father's father was from Czechoslovakia. And the main tensions in the home came from the different expectations of the two cultures for family. I liked school, did okay in school, went on to college. I'd really wanted to go to college. Went to a small private school for 2 years and then transferred into Portland to the medical school for their nursing program. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in nursing, and after I got my license, I worked as a registered nurse for many years. I retired in 2013. I had accepted Jesus at a church camp when I was about 10. I had won a partial scholarship to camp by memorizing a whole section of John 14. And it was there at the camp that they explained to me it wasn't just a case of believing about Jesus. I had to ask Jesus into my heart. And that meant something to me. I took it seriously. Well, then Mom was from a different, more liturgical type church. And so as a teenager, I had to go there. Then when I got to college, as most college kids, I wanted to, what's it like with this and what's it like with that? But Dad had very much instilled in us, don't do things that you're going to later regret. And so that kept me from getting into a lot of things that young people have a tendency to get into. And it was when I was about 20 and at my first year in nursing school that I made a more adult commitment to Christ of, yes, Jesus, you can have control of my life. And from then on, I've been regular with church and that. After I finished college, I worked for a year at the hospital in Portland, and then I moved to Chicago to see how another part of the world lived. It was a very different world from where I'd grown up. And I was there. I ended up being there for about 20 years, met my husband there. We got married there, had 3 daughters. And then as the girls were approaching their junior high years, we both wanted to get back to the West Coast at some point. And so it was like, well, we really need to get moved before the girls get into their teenage years. And so he was in healthcare administration and put out word among some of the networking among some of his contacts and ended up with a job in Seattle. So we moved to the Seattle area. And it was during that time that he left me and we ended up divorced. The girls all graduated from high school there and went various ways for their post-high school education. Well, then, after that, I had to work a lot more, and God just worked in my life so many ways and was very good to me. Well, then, for a recent experience, it's like, I've been hearing testimonies at church, and many of them are big events in a life. Well, mine are just little everyday things. But last winter, it was a nice weekend, the end of January, and I had taken my dog over to Lakewood to walk on the trails and that, and we'd been walking on the trails down lower. And we got back up to the car. I was parked near the prairie thing, and there was smoke coming up out of the grass in the prairie area. And as I watched, there got to be flames. And it's, late Saturday afternoon, that seemed kind of weird. And there were some guys around. I asked, what's going on? No, it looks like just a late season or a seasonal burn. Well, that seemed a little strange on a Saturday late afternoon. And I saw another couple come walking from another path, and I walked over to them, and, well, they didn't know either, and we all thought it was weird. So we called the fire department. They came, and there was wind, so the fire was moving fairly quickly. There was wind, and it burnt a pretty good section of that prairie area. They got it out. I went home. Well, the next day after church, it was a nice day again. I decided to take my dog walking over there again and just see how far did that fire burn. And so I had looked at one spot and was cutting through the grass instead of staying on paths, and I stumbled on some rocks and fell. My phone got out of my pocket. I knocked my glasses off, and there were some trees right there, and I figured, well, if I get over by the tree, I can get a hold of something and pull myself up. Well, it took me a while, but I worked my way over to the tree because I was on my knees and they were hurting. I was on some rocks. And I got over the tree and got lined up in a way that I should have been able then to just push myself up. Couldn't do it. I didn't have the strength to push my way up. And I waited, hoping somebody'd come walking around. Nobody came. Fine. I could see people in the distance. I tried yelling, but an open air out like that, nobody heard me. And so then I thought, I should pray. So I prayed, asking the Lord to please send somebody and do it in a way that would bring honor and glory to himself. And, I had my phone, and I knew I could have called my daughter. Two of my daughters live here in Salina. But the one daughter that was home at that time, I didn't want to bother her because I figured she's going to be fixing dinner for her family, and I hated to bother her, and there was no way I wanted to call 911 and deal with them wanting to take me to the hospital and all that. I just didn't want to deal with that at all. So I prayed and see if God bring somebody soon. Well, then I had decided if it goes too long, I'll have to call my daughter. Well, you lose track of time in that situation. I don't know whether it was 5 minutes or 10 minutes of that. A woman came walking with two dogs. And when she got close enough to me, I said, can you help me get up? I can't get up. And she said, well, let me take the dogs to the car. I'll come back and help you. So she did, and she came back with her husband. They got me up, got me to the car. I was pretty shaky at that point. Got me to the car, and I was sitting on the front seat, turned outward and talking to the lady. She was staying with me a little bit to make sure I was okay. And we're talking a little bit, and then I just felt like I should say something that I'd prayed. So I told her that I had prayed that God would send somebody. And her response, she says, that just sends chills up my spine. She said, we normally don't come here. We were headed home from helping my husband's mother, and we just come on the spur of the moment, came down the road, and then when we got near here, again on the spur of the moment, decided to come in to the park here, and we were just going to let the dogs out by the car for a minute. We got in here, and I decided to walk around. And it just, as she said it in that, I thought, those impulses must have come from when I was praying and asking for help. And it just really, again, even in the small things, how God knows what we need, but sometimes he waits until we ask. And, when I stop and think of how vast the whole universe is, and God is the master of all that, and yet at the same time, he knows each one of us so well. He knows the number of hairs on our head, and he knows our needs. And sometimes he takes care of the needs without us even being aware that he was doing it, but other times he wants us to ask. And I think it's just really, we serve a marvelous God. So that's my story of just an everyday incident that happened.